So I'm very pleased to be interviewing Curtis Sargent here today, and he's part of the 2414 Coalition and other things, which we'll find out through this interview. But Curtis, could you share with us, when did you first come across the concepts that are now being called church planting movements, disciple-making movements, and where have you personally worked to put them into practice?
Yeah, well, the first place that I was doing this was among an unengaged people group on an island off the south coast of China. And so I had been assigned there, and my task was supposedly to establish a beachhead church that would then be able to advance, the evangelization of that people group. And I was very dissatisfied with that goal. I thought the goal should be to saturate the island with the gospel. But at the same time, I realized very quickly that there was nothing that I had ever seen or heard of that could possibly do that in my lifetime. So I began to pray and purpose in my heart to only do things that would result in multiplying disciples and multiplying simple house churches. And that if multiplication could happen, then it was possible to reach them. And that is indeed what ended up happening. And that was in 1991. And so I've been working on this since then.
Wow. Okay. And as you look back at that experience of yours, and as you've learned about other people who've been practicing similar things around the globe, can you give us the sense of the scope of what's going on here and how you actually legitimately know it's happening, that it's not just a whole bunch of inflated pop culture fishtails?
Yeah, so that story the short answer would be in the 2414 coalition that you mentioned. So that's a coalition of practitioners of this type of approach to disciple making and church planting. And just, not many years ago, we didn't really have any good sense of how much this was being used, because the early places were all in restricted access environments. And so security was a big concern. So there wasn't a lot of communication about it or publicity. But about 3 years ago, when the 2414 coalition began to emerge or be formed, we began doing research, on that and getting in touch with people who were in movements all over the place, and then seeing who they were in touch with, and then kind of putting all these pieces together. And so currently there are, well over 1,300 movements that we know about using these type of approaches. And those have resulted in about 77 million new disciples. And the vast majority of that fruit has only come about in the last 10 years or so. So it's something that no one realized was going on at the scale and scope it was, until we tried to put everybody in touch with each other. And then these reports began to trickle in. And so there's a guy who is sort of taking the lead for our global efforts in research. His name is Justin Long. And if you look up his website, I believe he has a little dashboard that gives regular updates on these numbers that I'm throwing out as he unearths, or uncovers more of what's happening.
Okay. Wow. Wow. I understand from what you've shared with me before that God asked you to come back to your passport culture, and you're here in North America wanting to see this type of thing happen here. Why is that, and how did that come about for you?
Yeah, that was interesting. I grew up overseas. My parents were missionaries. And so, in many ways, though the United States is my passport country, I've never really had much affinity with the country or, particular passion. My call has always been to least reached peoples and areas. But about 8 years ago now, the Lord spoke to me and told me he wanted me to start focusing half my time on the United States. And so I have been doing that the last 8 years. And for me, it's not so much related to the numbers or the access to the gospel as it is to the quality of disciple making. I mean, just as, our hearts can be touched by places that don't have access to the gospel, similarly, they can be touched for places where people are experiencing much less than the Lord wants them to, in terms of the abundant life that He desires for us. And it seemed to me that the depth of discipleship in this country was getting shallower and shallower and shallower. And while it's true that movements, sometimes do result in very fast growth in the kingdom, to me, as important is the depth of growth that we see in disciples that are living out these patterns. And that was something that I do desire for this country. And so that's, a little different than the nature of my lifelong call to least reach peoples. But that's been what has really grabbed me about the time I've spent focusing here in the US.
Okay. And as you've been like preparing for this, it was well before COVID came along. You were led to put together something that's called zume.training. And that's to kind of address these issues that were stirring in your heart for the context here in North America. So could you give us a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of that and how you think it might fit particularly well for those of us that are having a similar kind of longing for deeper discipleship and greater kingdom impact in our countries?
Right. Well, I've had a long-term conviction that online training can never replace live training. And I still believe that. And that there were, many ways that live training was superior. So I just determined not to really get into it. But as you mentioned a few years ago, I did start to feel as if the Lord wanted me to start getting involved in online training. And one reason was because of the different context here. There are lots of people who already name the name of Christ. And this is material that we want available to everyone. And there aren't a huge number of trainers here. Most of the trainers in these approaches have been in least reached places around the world, not in North America. So it meant that there was a lot of time being invested in doing introductory level training, and not just here in North America, but really around the world. If you're trying to train people who are already believers, there's only a percentage of those who decide they are willing to make the commitment and sacrifice necessary, to pursue this kind of a change in their own lives and ministry. Mm-hmm. So I foresaw that this online training could sort of be a filter to help identify those people who were really serious. Mm-hmm. And that did turn out to be the case. But there are other use cases for the online training as well. It can be just serve as repetition for people who have already been exposed to the materials, because no one really catches it all the first time. It can be like training wheels for people as they are new in movements, but already are being called on to equip others so that they can lean some on these videos in topics where they don't feel confident to present themselves. And then, of course, it enables us to work with other languages and know exactly what's being communicated, because right now we have, I believe, 33 languages live.
Wow.
And by the end of the year, that should be 40 languages that will be live on the site. And it's good for that as well.
And so as you've been seeing people from across North America coming into this Zume training, or even into the larger 2414 coalition, what are some of the, like, especially as those people have been popping, saying, I really want this. How is it resonating in their hearts? What are some of the common themes that is coming out of the longing of their hearts, and how this is hitting them well?
That's a great question. I think there may be as many answers to that as there are people, but some, maybe that you hear more often are things like, I've always known I should be doing X or Y or Z, but I didn't really know how to go about it. And so that this has provided me, some instruction in how to do that, and some, spurred me on, to get my feet wet. And once they have done X, Y, or Z, they find out indeed it's very fulfilling, and, really met some of the desires of, how they hoped the Lord might use them. Um, that could be anything from sharing their faith to, new ways to understand prayer, to, how to impact or follow up or coach, you know, people who have come to faith. But I think that sort of opportunity to be engaged in ways that they didn't know how to earlier.
Hmm. So it's, you've seen it resonating with this sense of longing of, hey, I want something different, I just don't know exactly how to do it. And so this is providing them that a sense of a knowledge of a better way to get engaged with the things that are on their heart. As you've been training the people over the last number of years, especially here in North America, what are some of the more common awakenings or the gaps that are being revealed, that people are realizing, oh, I need to change this in my life if I'm going to be a disciple worth multiplying like this?
Yeah. Again, that might vary by person, but there are some patterns. One is people realize how much of their life spiritually has been consuming, you know, where they're just receiving, and haven't been, making opportunities then to pour into others. And that can take a lot of different forms. Another one is sort of viewing life a little more holistically. Many times here in North America, people tend to have the experience, or, an unstated assumption that our spiritual life is just one part of our life. And so, there's our spiritual life, there's our life at work, there's our life at home, there's our life, doing whatever we do for relaxation, or, all of that. And these are viewed almost separately. And then coming to the realization that no, all of this is intended to be affected and impacted and guided by our kingdom identity. And so that holistic view, and related to that, is how people view time. And so, there seems to be a kind of an attitude of a poverty of time here in North America. And people never feel like they have enough time to do the things they need to do. But when viewed from a kingdom perspective, the question becomes, how can I use this time in a way that glorifies the Lord and advances the kingdom. And that's true whether it's as a parent or as a spouse or as an employee or an employer and so on. And some of these just sort of worldview changes may be, in some senses, a bigger issue than the specific tools.
Okay. Wow. So as you've seen people like overcoming these internal obstacles, these even maybe there's some external obstacles, and they've been putting into practice what they're learning. What's some of the fruit that people have been pouring out of their lives as they start to walk in step with the Spirit in these ways?
One that I hear very frequently is how people become more aware of the Lord speaking to them and communicating with them, and that giving sort of a new vitality, a new vibrancy, because they're having this constant interaction with the Lord, and also um, a sense of responsibility for those that they're living with, living among, and those that they're ministering to. So really, one way to summarize that might be to speak of it in terms of the depth of their relationships with others is often significantly impacted. Then, I guess the another major thing would be this, I don't know, this fulfillment maybe that comes from being used. I referred earlier to our tendency for, in many cases, to be largely consumers in our spiritual lives, but the opportunity to be a contributor and to, be playing the part for which the Lord designed us, that sort of fulfillment is often another result.
Wow. Wow. Well, I look forward to sharing another interview about some of the of what this looks like when it's being lived out among individuals, where it's impacted communities of faith, where it's impacted larger regions, and seeing networks grow up there. And that'll come in some future interviews here with some other folks that you've mentored along the way. So what are some foundational steps that people could begin to take right away to engage in this kind of new disciple making lifestyle?
Yeah, one of the easiest would be to take zume.training. It's free. It's a self-directed process. If you do have questions, you can click and request a coach, and have somebody who's a practitioner to answer any questions or guide you through the process. If you're going to do that, my strong suggestion would be get a group of people to do it together, and really 4 to 12 people, anywhere in that range, is an appropriate size, and it helps provide some of the interaction that really helps the learning process, and some accountability and some encouragement. And so, just taking that step. The 2414 website would be a place that you could express interest if this is something you believe the Lord's calling you to pursue, and then you could be put in touch with people who are hopefully relatively nearby, who are on that same journey, and that could be a significant step. So yeah, the principles of the approach aren't complicated, and the tools aren't complex, but it's like a lot of things that are important. They're simple but not easy. So I think it is important to really feel the Lord's calling you to pursue this, because I'm confident you will be tested, you know, if you begin to pursue this.
Could you even share like how are people often tested when they engage in this?
Yeah, it's remarkable how coincidentally, right after seriously deciding to pursue this type of ministry, that people encounter significant health issues, financial issues, relationship issues, problems at work, problems, that are really severe. And it's, in some senses, it's no surprise to them, because as part of the training, we mention that, this is a way to get a spiritual target on your back, in a sense. And how we respond to persecution and suffering is one of the four main ways we talk about in terms of how people grow as disciples.
Mm.
It's one that doesn't get a lot of press here in North America, but there are numerous places in scripture that talk about how persecution or suffering can grow us in our faith and in our discipleship. But many of those are contingent upon our proper response. And so it's important that we do respond well when we start facing those.
And that's a part of the training and the larger support network, is how to be responding well inside of those troubles and sufferings.
Yes, that's right.
And what have you seen in your experiences in other countries, from the other movements, and even what we're seeing here in North America? How does prayer fit into that? And how would you recommend people get ready for
Yeah.
engaging prayer?
So prayer is both in a sense, a prerequisite and a primary piece of these multiplicative movements. Prayer for people seeking to start these movements, and then prayer by people among whom the movements are being started. And so I mentioned persecution and suffering was one of the four ways that we really focus on for growing. One of them is prayer. And there are significant ways that we seek to encourage prayer, both with individuals and in corporate prayer. And so, in some of these things that I've mentioned, there would be lots of resources for that. So within the 2414 coalition, there are plenty of opportunities for global prayer and for regional prayer. And in fact, we've only very recently, in a sense, launched the North America region for 2414. And we've got hopes and desires to have prayer networks for every state in the US and every province in Canada. And so that would be a great thing. If it isn't started yet in your province, start it. And we've got tools, we've got resources, we've got a URL already set up with a template that can help, guide that. In the zume.training, we're actually tied into that same effort for the states and the provinces, but there are other prayer resources, and it's of course a significant part of the training. So yes, prayer is a critical aspect.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, I suppose we can't get into it all. It is the Zume training is 10 parts, right? 10 weeks of introduction and foundational building in that.
Yes, there are a couple of ways. The preferred way to go through it in those small group studies would be, as you just mentioned, 10 2-hour or a little over 2-hour segments. And then we do have an option in some languages, including English, where it's possible to go through as an individual. And then it's broken up into 31 segments. And on each one of those 31 segments, you need to sort of check off the completion of a different part of that. So the first part would be just going through the materials yourself. The second part would be actually implementing it in your own life. The third part would be sharing it with others. And then the fourth part, training them to be equipping others, so that you're already seeing some of this generational growth. And when you go through those four aspects for all 31 items, then you've completed the training. So,
And there's I think I saw the other day that nifty map you have of where the zume.training stuff is happening in the world, but also North America. So if people are kind of feeling like, oh, I'm the only one, I'm the lone Elijah, and there's no other remnants around me, they could maybe look to the map and realize how many other people are awakening and testing this out to see if it could be the game changer for them.
yes, that's on a different website than the training.
Okay.
That's at zume.vision.
Mhm.
And you can look through the, pull down menus and look for a map. The one that's up currently and is kept live is just on the last 100 hours.
Yeah.
And but I think everyone will be surprised to see how much is happening every 100 hours. So yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for this introduction, Curtis, and I look forward to the chance that you'll be able to share more. And we've got lots of great places to start out of what it is you've shared with us.
Well, good to talk with you, John.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye for now.